Welcome, witches, wizards, and muggles alike, to another enchanting episode of Magical Tales from the Slytherin Common Room, bringing your favorite Harry Potter fanfiction to audio format. So sit back, relax, and Accio headphones, and let the magic begin. Apostasy by Deydralinne, Chapter 18, The Transformation. It was only 6 days between Astoria's potion being done and her next bout of bad days. Hermione stood nervously in the doorway as Theo gathered the blonde's hair while she vomited nothing but blood into the toilet. Not all of her beautiful blonde hair had been spared. A few strands at the front had been caught in the expulsion before Theo managed to clear them from her face. Theo rubbed the witch's back and offered her soothing words that Hermione couldn't hear. She stood by and watched silently as the blonde shook and the color draining from Astoria's face more and more with every violent emptying of her stomach. Today would be the first trial of Hermione's potion. The only issue was that Astoria needed to stop vomiting long enough to keep it down, and for the 20 minutes it would take to absorb into her system. The vomiting issue was something that couldn't be avoided, but Hermione was already churning over ideas in her head about things she could do to counteract that unfortunate issue. Footsteps sounded down the hallway behind her. Daphne appeared at her shoulder, a deep inhale of air at the side of her little sister, hunched over the bowl of a downstairs toilet. Draco says the Dark Lord will see you this morning, sooner rather than later. He's waiting with Blaise and Ginny in the sitting room when you're ready. Hermione turned and looked at the witch beside her with annoyance. Seriously? This morning? I was hoping to be here for Astoria. Monitor how the potion goes. Daphne offered her a pitying smile. That's the price of being in high demand, I'm afraid. You create potions for everyone at once, and you are bound to be pulled in multiple directions. Hermione sighed and turned back to the blonde, now gasping for air. The thought of asking them to hold off on giving her the concoction until she returned from Riddle Manor crossed her mind for just a fraction of a second. But that would be unfair to Astoria. She had created the mixture to ease her ailment, not to study her like a scientific experiment, so she squashed the thought as quickly as it arrived. All right, then, Hermione sighed. Theo, you need to make sure that someone is with her at all times. Write down anything you think might be relevant. Actually, write down anything you think might not be relevant as well. Hermione spoke quietly into the bathroom. Theo looked at her with wide, uncertain eyes, but nodded all the same. Astoria, capturing his attention again as another wave of vomiting took hold. Hermione could hear the sobs in the woman's breaths, and her heart broke for the witch. She had already been in this exact situation for 2 hours this morning, and there were no signs of letting up. It was clear to Hermione that Astoria was on borrowed time. She could see the panic in Theo's eyes, and he tried his best to be supportive. She saw it in the way that Pansy stayed extra close to Daphne, who had an influx of public affection towards her girlfriend. She saw it in Draco's reluctancy to leave. If Hermione was going to pull off a cure, she needed to do it sooner rather than later. The only issue was that the Slytherins were all too emotionally involved in this, and she had things she needed to do without getting anyone's hopes up or cluing them in on what she was doing. Ready? Draco asked, uncharacteristically quiet as she stepped into the sitting room. Hermione shrugged. No, but let's get it over with anyway. Draco hummed in agreement, and the four of them made their way to the apparition point. Riddle Manor had lost its daunting feeling now. Instead of looming over her, it seemed smaller, more familiar, and nearly friendly. The sun made the estate warm, and the scent of jasmine hung in the air, making it almost cozy and welcoming, adding a storybook feel to the old place. Harry had cried once upon a time when he had relived his experiences, telling her how the dark, cold graveyard had haunted his dreams for months afterwards. But when Hermione had visited the place, she had found that it was just another graveyard, not unlike other ones that she had visited over the years. Sure, his perception of it was under a harrowing experience where he had witnessed the death of one of their peers, but extracting the skull of Tom Riddle Sr. had been just another day for her. It was no less peculiar now, carrying it in her bag through the front doors towards the Dark Lord. His manor, which normally had the odd Death Eater roaming the halls, was empty. He had specifically cleared the place in case this little correction failed. As far as Hermione knew, only she and her housemates even knew this would be taking place. Her only concern was that she would be untouchable if this failed, but Draco and Blaise would not be. While the 3 people accompanying her had the utmost confidence in her abilities, Voldemort did not, and Hermione knew it. She needed this to work, needed to prove that her presence in their ranks was needed. They had dinner with Tony this coming weekend to discuss the proposed end of the war, and she wanted Tom to be there, given her plan for him to step into the role of Minister of Magic. In order for that to happen, she needed Tom, not Voldemort or the Dark Lord. She had confidence in her capabilities as well, but there was always part of her that listened to the niggling voice of doubt, that perhaps everyone who had doubted her over the years saw something that she didn't. Draco led them through the manor to a part of the estate that Hermione had not yet been to. She had seen the empty ballroom several times now and the dining room once, but the direction in which they were heading seemed to be leading towards Voldemort's private quarters. Draco paused outside a large set of double doors covered in decorative Gothic wrought iron curls. His wand sliced across his hand, causing a cut in his palm, just deep enough to start bleeding. He held his hand up to a shimmering ward on the door, and the doors opened inward. He motioned for the others to enter while he passed a quick healing charm over the wound, sealing it once more. Hermione stepped into a large private sitting room that overlooked the manor's gardens below. There was more furniture in here than she had seen in the entire rest of the property combined, all of it a dark coffee color with light wooden tones, and all of it in an antique style. Hermione suspected that this all belonged to Voldemort's father's family at one point in time. Voldemort emerged from a room off of the main sitting area, and for a moment, Hermione questioned if he owned anything but tattered black robes. Though she supposed it was hard to imagine him doing anything even remotely human these days, like shopping or sleeping. Evidently he must, given that he had once come out of what was obviously his bedroom, but imagining it was still hard to do. Miss Granger, Miss Weasley, Draco Blaze, how delightful. His face was tight and pinched, his eyes suspicious as they narrowed on her. Are we ready to proceed? Shall we get straight to it then? No small talk? Hermione smirked jokingly and reached into her bag, pulling items from it, nodding in question to the coffee table in front of the Chase Lounge. Voldemort didn't seem to muse, but nodded in acceptance. Hermione placed down a medium black cauldron, placed the skull at the bottom of it, and began tipping the components onto it before heating the metal with the wave of her wand. I will need you to donate a few drops of your blood, she told him. She could feel the way he was staring at her, but she carried on, stirring in the ingredients. Eventually, when she gave him no reaction, he seemed to have decided that it must be a legitimate request. The mistrust of her was obviously still high, or perhaps it was just his general paranoia. His hand moved into her line of sight, and as Draco had done earlier, he sliced the flesh on his palm. Much deeper than necessary, the blood pooling on his hand was darker than blood usually was, likely corrupted after years of living a half-life, or from having split his soul so many times. The thick blood began to drip, splattering against the exposed top of his father's skull. Hermione threw in the final ingredients, several long unicorn hairs, and began stirring runes into it with the tip of her wand. Keeping her mind clear and focused on restoring Tom's actual face, she began reciting the incantation. She chanted over and over as the magic began to tug in her fingertips, making her hand and wand shake ever so slightly as the forces of the magic tested her willpower. Hermione fought through it and continued. Dark magic always required a little sacrifice. In this case, it would drain her a little of her energy for a day or two, but that was fine, a cost willingly paid if it meant aiding their plans. Eventually enough magic had been taken and the contents of the cauldron turned a thin, liquidy black. Hermione sighed and slumped into an armchair behind her, breathing deeper with an exhaustion that had hit her. It was only temporary, and she could deal with temporary. She waved her hand towards the cauldron. It is ready. The silence was tense. No one moved. No one spoke. Voldemort stared at her for what was an uncomfortable length of time. Hermione raised her eyebrow at him and stared back. She refused to cower. He could go to hell if he ever thought she would. What will happen? He asked finally. Hermione exhaled slowly and shook her head. I'll be honest, Baldy, I don't know. I've never taken the potion myself. I do know that at the end of it, you will look human again, though. So there's that. Hermione answered casually and contemplated if it would be rude to close her eyes and have a quick 5-minute power nap. Voldemort peered into the cauldron with a disgusted sneer. Hermione snorted in amusement. Sorry that it doesn't look more appealing, she muttered sarcastically, letting her head fall back against the back of the armchair and let her eyes fall closed. Around her, nobody moved, and the silence started to pull her under into the depths of sleep until suddenly, everything happened at once. A loud thud sounded, followed by an almighty roar. Hermione's eyes flew open to see the horrified faces of Blaise, Draco, and Ginny staring at the ground on the other side of the coffee table. Hermione leapt to her feet and peered down at Voldemort, writhing on the ground in agony, which was nothing in comparison to the flesh that was peeling from his face, as if it had been burnt from his body. "What did you do?" Blaise yelled over the sound of his lord's agony. Hermione shook her head. What did she do? She intended to fix his face, not remove it. A large chunk of flesh slid off his bony cheek, another from his fingers, all of it melting away like nothing, while Voldemort screamed louder. Bile rose in the back of her throat at the smell of the rotting meat. Hermione, do something, Ginny screamed at her in a panic, but she didn't know what to do. What was there to do other than watch the horrifying scene unfold? She didn't even know what she had done wrong. It should have worked. Silence fell. Voldemort stopped writhing and screaming. Is he? Draco panicked. Eyes flew to her. The little color he had drained from his face. She had no answer for him. She knew she was opening and closing her mouth like an idiot. But then the sigh exhaled from the Dark Lord, and all four of them collectively sighed in relief. Muscle began to reshape itself over the wizard's exposed flesh, building on itself and filling out to a more defined structure. The red made way for a sickly white color that continued to grow and change toward a soft tan skin forming where there had been none. The structure of his face morphing, the cartilage of his nose began to protrude from his face, and a small dark brown sprouts of hair pushed through his skull. Human nails grew where there had only been rancid, brittle-looking claws before. No one made a sound as the face of Tom Riddle took shape. Everyone staring at the unconscious figure with bated breath. He silently pled to any entity that would listen that she hadn't just killed the man, sending him into cardiac arrest. Collectively, they let out a relieved gasp as his chest began to rise and fall with minuscule breaths. Holy shit, Ginny whispered. That was scary for a minute. Draco glowered Hermione's way. Some warning would have been nice, he snarled. Hermione sneered at him. If I had known that was going to happen, don't you think I would have said so? She snapped back at him. Guys, Ginny stated, but Hermione was too busy glaring as a blonde. I don't know, do I? You swoop in here barely 2 weeks ago and start throwing your weight around. Hermione smirked and raised an eyebrow. If I remember correctly, you liked it when I threw my weight around last time. Guys, Blaise said more firmly, but again, Draco and Hermione's eyes never deviated from each other, locked in a battle of wills that had become their life as of late. You think so? Just wait, witch. You and I, round 2 when this is over. I'll show exactly how much I enjoy throwing your weight around, he snarled. Hermione's mouth opened with the intention of a retort on the tip of her tongue, but the gurgling sound of someone being sick finally pulled her attention back to Voldemort, who had rolled onto his side and spewed the thin black potion all over the carpet. His body, obviously still weak from the ordeal, was shaking, and he had broken into a sweat. But he was definitely a human. A laugh of amazement bubbled out of her. Oh my God, I did it, she began laughing loudly in surprise. I actually did it. Your surprise at the fact should be concerning. Hermione shook her head and flipped him off, not sparing him another glance. Instead, she slinked around the table and toward the man crouching next to him in a proud grin. I am a genius. Tom peered up at her through half-opened eyes with a grim expression. Modest, too, he muttered. You nearly killed me. Hermione waved her hand dismissively. Rubbish. Never doubted myself for a minute. She grinned at him. His eyes twitched, and a slow chuckle rose out of him. Eventually, he found the strength to turn and rise up on shaky hands and knees, using the chase beside him for support as he pulled himself up onto it. Would you like to see? Hermione beamed as she knelt in front of him, pulling a handheld mirror from her bag and offering it to him. Quiet fell between them as he took the handle and turned it onto himself, his face void of any reaction for a moment as he turned in different directions. His now deep brown-colored eyes shifted to her and narrowed in bewilderment, looking at her once more as if she were a riddle to be solved. "Hermione Granger, you astound me."